Hi everyone, welcome to video 2.4. Today we're going to be talking about using a social justice lens, and your objective is that you are going to read chapter 4 in Of Mice and Men and use the social justice lens to analyze that chapter. So just as a reminder, we've already learned about two of the critical lenses in this unit, and the first one was the Marxist lens, and remember that was focused on social class and how money impacts power in our society. The second critical lens was the feminist lens, and that one was focused on gender equality and how gender shapes the characters in the text. So our third and final critical lens that we're talking about in this unit is the social justice lens. And this one is a theory focused on looking critically at race. So I want to give us a definition so that we are all on the same page about what this means. The definition of race is that it's a group of people thought to share certain distinctive physical characteristics, such as facial structure and or skin color. This next part is really important though. So race is socially constructed, and that just means that people have actually made up the concept of race. So it's kind of agreed upon in the scientific community that race has no biological basis, and that people actually created this system in order to categorize people and make some people superior and some people inferior. So although race is socially constructed or made up by people, racial identity is still very real, and racism is also very real. So it has very real consequences, even though it is a socially constructed system. So we're going to look at a couple definitions from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a very awesome Smithsonian museum in Washington, D.C. And they define racism as a system of advantage based on race that involves systems and institutions, not just individual mindsets and actions. The critical variable in racism is the impact or the outcome, not the intent. So that basically just means that you can be racist without trying. Like you could say, well, I didn't mean it that way, or I didn't mean to be racist. And that actually doesn't matter. You can still be racist without intending to be. And they also say that racism operates at multiple levels, including individual racism, interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and structural racism. So that just means that people can hold racist beliefs within themselves on a personal level. They can be racist in interpersonal relationships, like to a friend or a family member, but that racism can also operate on a much larger scale beyond just an individual person. So racism functions in our institutions and structures in our society, like schools or political systems or the media. All of those things can also be racist as well. Our next definition is whiteness. So whiteness and white racialized identity refer to the way that white people cut their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared. So we talked a little bit about this idea when we read A Raisin in the Sun, because the character of Beneatha, remember, she was very against this word assimilation. And assimilation just means becoming more like the dominant group or like white people in culture. And she did not want to assimilate, right? She didn't want to become more like white people. The final definition, privilege, you've probably heard this before. Privilege is a right or advantage that is given to some people and not others. And you might have heard it in the context of white privilege, which white people getting rights or advantages in our society that are not given to people of color. So some key ideas to understand as you use the social justice lens: that race is a social construct that has created racist systems within the way a community is structured and run. Systems that shape how our society is structured and run often treat individuals and groups differently based on their race and other aspects of their identity. These systems privilege and favor white people, and because of this, people of color often experience racism, which may be undercover, sometimes unconscious racism. The social justice lens seeks to remove focus from the dominant group or white culture and instead give the perspective of underrepresented groups, so people who are not white, people of color. So here's some questions that I want you to ask as you read Of Mice and Men. Where does race appear and shape the ways that characters interact with one another in the book? How is racism challenged or accepted by the characters, and what problems arise from this? What systems are put into place based on race in the text? And how does race impact the outcome of the characters, and how are different racial groups portrayed? Finally, whose perspective is the dominant narrative in the text, and whose perspective is not shown in the book? So as you have probably noticed, there's only one character in Of Mice and Men who is not white, and that is Crooks, who is African American, and he works in the stables on the ranch. And we've already seen a lot of racism directed at Crooks. That comes in the forms of racial slurs and the way that the other characters talk to him and treat him. So in chapter 4, we're going to see a pretty long conversation between Crooks and Lenny. And as you read chapter 4, I want you to think about how race is impacting the way that they're talking to each other and what they're talking about. Finally, I want you to reflect a little bit on our own society through a social justice lens. So come up with one way that race might impact systems in our society. So what do you notice about the world around us? Maybe that's in schools or in political systems, in jobs, in healthcare. How does race impact the world that we live in today? And the second question to think about is the dominant narratives in our society are usually from the perspective of who? Who is the dominant narrative in our society? All right, if you have any questions about the concepts in this video, please feel free to come and talk to me about it or ask me questions. And make sure you're taking some notes in your packet. And I hope you enjoy reading chapter 4.